I never thought I'd be standing in the middle of Riverside Estates in Phoenix, Arizona, watching my excavator tear through a collapsed retaining wall while the HOA president screamed at me about saving her precious community. But here we were on that scorching Tuesday afternoon in July. The temperature hit 112 degrees, and the sweat running down my back had nothing to do with the heat and everything to do with the sinking feeling that I was about to get screwed. My name is Patrick Yates, and I own Desert Sun Excavation, a small but reputable contracting company I built from the ground up over the past 15 years. I specialized in residential and commercial excavation work throughout the Phoenix metro area, and my reputation meant everything to me. Every job completed on time, every invoice paid, every relationship maintained professionally. That was my motto, and it had served me well until the moment Brenda Patterson came into my life. Brenda was the HOA president of Riverside Estates, a gated community of about 200 homes nestled in North Phoenix. She was 53 years old with that distinctive haircut that screamed middle management. You know the one, short, heavily highlighted, and styled to defy both gravity and common sense. She wore oversized sunglasses even indoors and had perfected the art of the condescending smile. The whole mess started on a Monday morning when my phone rang at 6:30. I was already at my equipment yard, doing my usual morning inspection of the machinery. My CAT 320 excavator, my pride and joy, sat gleaming in the early morning sun. I had just finished servicing it the week before, and it ran like a dream. "Patrick Yates," I answered, wiping grease from my hands onto my jeans. "Mr. Yates, this is Brenda Patterson from Riverside Estates HOA. We have an emergency situation and we need your excavator immediately." Her voice carried that particular pitch of panic mixed with entitlement that should have been my first warning sign. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, walking toward my small office trailer. "Our main retaining wall collapsed during last night's monsoon storm. It's blocking the main entrance and none of our residents can get in or out. We have people who need to get to work, medical appointments, emergencies. We need this fixed now." I pulled up my schedule on my computer. I had a job scheduled for that afternoon, but nothing in the morning. "I can come take a look, but I need to assess the situation first before I commit to anything." "There's no time for assessments," Brenda snapped. "We need action now. How much do you charge?" I explained my standard rates, $150 per hour for the excavator and operator, with a 4-hour minimum. For emergency calls, I added a 25% surcharge. She barely let me finish. "Fine, whatever, just get here now. I'll text you the address." I should have gotten everything in writing right then. I should have insisted on a signed contract before I moved a single piece of equipment. But she made it sound so urgent, and I figured an HOA, an actual legal entity with funds and insurance, would be good for the money. I had worked with HOAs before without issue. This should have been simple. I loaded up my excavator onto my trailer, grabbed my hard hat and safety vest, and headed out to Riverside Estates. The drive took about 45 minutes through morning traffic. When I arrived, I could see what Brenda meant by emergency. A massive retaining wall, probably 20 feet high and 50 feet long, had partially collapsed. Concrete, rebar, and dirt blocked the entire main entrance. Cars lined up on both sides, residents honking and yelling. Brenda met me at the gate, her face red and blotchy. "Finally! Do you know how long I've been dealing with this chaos?" "I came as fast as I could," I said, stepping out of my truck. "Let me assess the damage and figure out the best approach." "Just move it all," she gestured wildly at the debris. "Push it to the side, clear the entrance. We'll deal with proper repairs later." I walked around the collapsed wall, taking photos and notes. The wall had failed due to poor drainage and the weight of saturated soil behind it. This wasn't just a simple cleanup job. This required careful excavation to prevent further collapse, proper shoring, and eventual reconstruction. But for now, I could at least clear enough debris to open one lane of traffic. "This is going to take several hours," I told Brenda. "And you're going to need a structural engineer to look at this before you do any permanent repairs." "I don't care about that right now. Just clear the entrance so people can get through." I had her verbally confirm the rates again, and I made a point of recording the conversation on my phone's voice memo app, something I had started doing after a contractor friend got burned on a job. "So we're agreed, 150 per hour plus the 25% emergency surcharge, 4-hour minimum." Yes, just start working." I spent the next 6 hours carefully removing debris, sorting concrete chunks from dirt, and creating a stable path through the collapsed section. The work was delicate because the remaining wall structure was compromised. One wrong move could bring down another section. My excavator performed beautifully, the hydraulics responding smoothly to every control input. Other residents came by to watch and thank me. A man named George, who lived in Unit 47, brought me a cold bottle of water. "Thank God you're here. I missed my morning shift, but at least I can get to work for the evening." A woman named Susan, probably in her 70s, stopped to tell me about her cat who needed to get to the vet. "Brenda's been calling everyone, but nobody else would come out on such short notice. You're a lifesaver." By 2 in the afternoon, I had cleared enough space for cars to pass through single file. Brenda appeared again, this time with 2 other women who I later learned were HOA board members. "Is that it?" Brenda asked, surveying my work. "For the emergency clearing, yes, but I need to emphasize again, you need an engineer to evaluate this entire wall system before it fails completely. What you're seeing here is just the beginning. We'll handle that. Send me your invoice. I'll have it to you by tomorrow morning. Just to confirm, 6 hours at 150 per hour with the 25% surcharge plus equipment transport fees. The total will be around $1,300. Brenda's expression shifted, something I couldn't quite read. "Fine. Email it to the HOA management email address." I loaded up my equipment and headed home, feeling good about a job well done. I had helped people in a genuine emergency, worked safely, and earned a fair day's pay. The next morning, I prepared a detailed invoice, including photos of the work completed, timestamps, and a breakdown of all charges. I even gave her a small discount on the transport fees as a goodwill gesture. The final total came to $1,275. I sent the invoice on Tuesday morning and didn't think much of it when I didn't hear back right away. HOAs had processes, paperwork, approvals. I figured I would get paid within the standard 30-day window I offered commercial clients. 2 weeks passed. I sent a polite follow-up email. No response. Another week passed. I sent another email and left a voicemail. Nothing. By the end of the 4th week, I was starting to get concerned. This wasn't just about the money, though $1,200 meant something to a small business owner. It was about respect and professional courtesy. I decided to visit Riverside Estates in person. When I arrived at the gate, a different scene greeted me. The collapsed wall section had been completely removed, and a new modular wall system was being installed by another contractor. I felt a spike of irritation. They had money to pay for new construction, but couldn't pay my invoice. I found Brenda in the HOA office, a small building near the community clubhouse. She was sitting behind a desk, typing on her computer, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Brenda, hi, I'm Patrick Yates. We spoke last month about the retaining wall emergency." She looked up, and I swear I saw recognition quickly masked by fake confusion. "I'm sorry, who?" "Patrick Yates from Desert Sun Excavation. I cleared the collapsed retaining wall back in July. I sent my invoice 4 weeks ago and haven't received payment." "Oh, that." She removed her glasses and gave me that condescending smile. "I'm afraid we won't be paying that invoice." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Excuse me, we never authorized that work. You showed up without a proper contract and performed services we didn't formally request. You called me. You specifically said it was an emergency and told me to come immediately. I have no record of that conversation, and frankly, the work you did was substandard. We had to hire real professionals to fix it properly." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "I have recordings of our phone conversation where you agreed to my rates. I have photos of the work. I have witnesses, residents who thanked me for clearing the entrance." Brenda leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Yates, I don't appreciate your tone. This is private property and I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I'm not leaving until we discuss payment. You owe me over $1,200 for work completed at your request. I owe you nothing. If you continue to harass me, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I left before the situation escalated further, my hands shaking with anger as I drove away. This was theft, plain and simple. But what really stung was the arrogance, the casual way she dismissed my work and professionalism. Back at my office, I consulted with my lawyer, a guy named Marcus Rodriguez, who handled my business contracts and occasional disputes. He reviewed everything: the invoice, the recordings, the photos, the text messages confirming the address. "You've got a solid case," Marcus said, leaning back in his office chair. "But HOAs can be tricky. They often have insurance and legal teams that will drag things out just because they can. You could sue, but for $1,200 the legal fees might cost you more than you'd recover." "So what do I do? Just eat the loss?" "I didn't say that. There are other approaches. Have you sent a formal demand letter?" "Not yet." "Let me draft one." "We'll give them 10 days to pay before we pursue legal action. Sometimes that's enough to get people's attention." Marcus sent the demand letter via certified mail and email. It was professional but firm, outlining the facts, referencing Arizona contract law, and making clear that failure to pay would result in further action. We got the return receipt showing Brenda had signed for the letter. The 10 days passed with no response. Then I got something unexpected: a letter from the Riverside Estates HOA attorney, a firm called Davidson and Associates. The letter claimed that I had trespassed on HOA property, performed unauthorized work, damaged additional sections of the retaining wall through negligent operation of my equipment, and created a liability risk for the community. They threatened to sue me for damages unless I withdrew my invoice demand immediately. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. Everything in it was a lie. I hadn't damaged anything. I had improved their situation at their explicit request. This was intimidation, pure and simple. "They're bluffing," Marcus said when I showed him the letter. "This is a standard tactic. They're hoping you'll back down rather than fight. But here's the thing, Patrick, if you want to push back, you need to be prepared for a real fight." "What would that look like?" "Small claims court. In Arizona, you can file for amounts up to $3,500. No lawyers needed, just you presenting your case to a judge. It costs about $50 to file. The downside is it takes time, probably a few months to get a court date." I thought about it for a day, but really, the decision was already made. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about principle. Nobody got to steal from me and then threaten me when I asked for what I was owed. I filed the small claims case the next week at the Maricopa County Justice Court. The filing process was straightforward. I filled out forms explaining the nature of the dispute, attached copies of my invoice and supporting documentation, and paid the filing fee. The court would serve Brenda and the HOA with notice of the lawsuit. While waiting for the court date, something interesting happened. I got a call from George, the resident who had brought me water during the job. "Patrick, hey, I hope it's okay that I tracked down your number. I'm on the HOA board. Well, I was recently elected after the whole wall disaster. I heard about the payment dispute, and I wanted to reach out." "I appreciate that, George. Yeah, it's been frustrating. I want you to know that several of us on the board had no idea Brenda was refusing to pay you. She handles a lot of the day-to-day operations, and we only see the financial reports at quarterly meetings. When I asked about the expenses related to the wall collapse, she told us she had handled everything. She handled it by not paying me." "Exactly. Look, there's going to be an HOA board meeting next week, open session for residents. I can't make any promises, but if you wanted to attend and present your case to the full board, it might help." I agreed to attend. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7. I prepared a presentation, printed copies of all my documentation, and practiced what I wanted to say. Marcus advised me to stay calm and factual, let the evidence speak for itself. The HOA meeting took place in the clubhouse, a nice facility with a small auditorium setup. About 30 residents attended, which George told me was actually a large turnout. The board sat at a table at the front, Brenda in the middle looking like she had just bitten into a lemon when she saw me walk in. The meeting covered various community issues, landscaping complaints, pool rules, and parking violations. Finally, George raised his hand. "Madam President, I'd like to add an item to the agenda. We have a contractor here who wishes to address the board regarding payment for services related to the retaining wall emergency in July." Brenda's jaw tightened. "That matter is being handled through proper legal channels. There's nothing to discuss." "Actually, I think there is," said another board member, a younger guy named Travis. "Several residents have brought concerns to me about how that situation was handled. I think we should hear what Mr. Yates has to say." The board voted, 4-1, Brenda being the sole dissenting vote, to allow me to speak. I stood up and approached the microphone set up for residents. "Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Patrick Yates, and I own Desert Sun Excavation. On July 16th, I received an emergency call from Miss Patterson requesting immediate excavation services to clear the collapsed retaining wall at your main entrance. I walked through the entire timeline, playing the recording of our initial phone conversation where she agreed to my rates, showing photos of the work in progress, and explaining what I had accomplished. I showed the invoice, the subsequent attempts to collect payment, and finally, the threatening letter from the HOA's attorney. All I want is to be paid for work that was explicitly requested and professionally completed. I helped your community in an emergency, and I deserve to be compensated fairly." When I finished, several residents started clapping. Brenda looked mortified. "This is highly inappropriate," she said, her voice shrill. "This is a legal matter that shouldn't be discussed in open session." "Then why hasn't it been paid?" asked Susan, the elderly woman with the cat. "I was there. I saw the work this young man did. He was professional, careful, and he solved our problem when nobody else would help." Other residents chimed in, their frustration with Brenda becoming apparent. It turned out the retaining wall fiasco was just the latest in a series of financial irregularities and management issues. People mentioned other contractors who had complained about payment delays, questionable expenses showing up on HOA financial reports, and Brenda's generally hostile attitude toward anyone who questioned her decisions. Travis, the younger board member, asked to see my documentation. I handed him copies of everything. He reviewed it carefully, passing pages to the other board members. "This seems pretty straightforward," Travis said. "We called him, he did the work, we should pay him." "We don't have authorization," Brenda insisted. "I never signed a contract." "You verbally authorized the work," George said, pointing at the transcript I had made from the recording. "It's right here. You agreed to his rates, you confirmed the emergency nature of the work, and you told him to send an invoice." "Verbal agreements aren't binding," Brenda shot back. "Actually, in Arizona they are," said a voice from the audience. A woman stood up, introducing herself as Linda Chen, an attorney who lived in the community. "Verbal contracts are legally enforceable, especially when there's evidence like recordings and witness testimony. The HOA is absolutely liable for this payment." The meeting devolved into chaos, residents arguing, board members debating, and Brenda trying desperately to maintain control. Finally, George called for a vote to authorize payment of my invoice. Brenda refused to allow the vote, claiming it wasn't properly agendized. The meeting ended in frustration, but I had accomplished something important. The board and residents now knew the truth, and they weren't on Brenda's side. 2 days later, I received another letter from Davidson and Associates, doubling down on their threats, and now claiming I had harassed their client by attending the HOA meeting. I forwarded it to Marcus, who actually laughed. "They're panicking," he said. "This is desperation. They know they're wrong, and they're trying to intimidate you into giving up." The small claims court date arrived in early November, about 4 months after the original job. The courtroom was a small, practical space with simple wooden benches and a desk for the judge. Brenda showed up with a lawyer, which was allowed even though he couldn't argue the case for her. The lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit, spent the time before the hearing coaching her on what to say. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Martinez, called our case. I presented my evidence, the recordings, the photos, the invoice, and the timeline. I spoke clearly and calmly, sticking to the facts. Brenda's defense was essentially what I expected. She claimed I had shown up without a contract, performed unauthorized work, and damaged property. She presented no evidence of any damage, just her assertions. Judge Martinez asked her directly, "Do you have photos or an engineer's report showing damage caused by Mr. Yates?" "Well, no, but it was obvious to anyone who looked at it." "So you have no actual evidence of negligence or damage?" "The whole wall had to be replaced. According to Mr. Yates's testimony, which you haven't disputed, he warned you that the entire wall system needed structural evaluation and eventual replacement. That's not damage he caused. That's a pre-existing condition he identified." The judge reviewed the recorded conversation. When Brenda's voice came through the speaker agreeing to the rates and confirming the emergency, I saw her face go pale. "Miss Patterson, this recording clearly establishes a verbal contract. You requested services, agreed to specific rates, and Mr. Yates performed those services satisfactorily. Do you have any evidence that contradicts this? He should have gotten a written contract. That would have been prudent, but it's not legally required. The verbal agreement, especially one with recorded evidence, is binding. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The Riverside Estates HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Yates $1,275, plus court costs of $50, for a total of $1,325. Payment is due within 30 days. I felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over me. Justice had been served. But as I would learn, Winning a judgment and actually collecting payment were two different things. 30 days passed with no payment. I contacted Marcus again. "Now we move to enforcement," he explained. "You can request a writ of execution, which allows you to seize assets or garnish bank accounts to satisfy the judgment." "How does that work?" "You file paperwork with the court. If they still don't pay, you can hire a constable to actually seize property belonging to the HOA. It's aggressive, but it's your legal right." I filed for the writ of execution, which cost another $150 in fees. The court granted it, and I sent a final notice to Brenda and the HOA board. They had 10 days to pay the judgment, or I would begin seizure proceedings. On the 9th day, I received a check from the HOA, but it was only for the original invoice amount of $1,275, not including the court costs. A letter accompanied it, stating that they were paying under duress and without admission of liability to avoid further legal complications. They still didn't include the court costs. I deposited the check, but immediately filed for the remaining $50 in court costs. I was done being nice. The judge issued a supplemental order and I sent it with another demand letter. This time, Brenda called me directly, her voice tight with anger. "You're destroying this community over $50. No, Brenda, you did that by refusing to pay a legitimate bill. I'm just making sure I'm paid everything I'm legally owed. You're a petty, vindictive man. And you're a thief who thought you could get away with stealing from a small business owner. Pay the $50 and we're done." She hung up on me. But 3 days later, a money order for $50 arrived in my mailbox with no note, no explanation, just the payment. I thought that was the end of it. I had been paid, justice was served, and I could move on. But the universe had other plans. In March of the following year, nearly 8 months after the original job, my phone rang early on a Saturday morning. It was George from Riverside Estates. "Patrick, I'm sorry to bother you on the weekend, but we have a situation, and I wanted to reach out personally before things got complicated." "What kind of situation?" "We have another emergency. The drainage system for the entire north section of the community has failed. We have flooding, property damage, and we need excavation work done immediately. I know what happened last time, and I want to make this right. Would you be willing to work with us if we handle everything properly this time?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to decline, to avoid Riverside Estates forever. But George had been decent throughout the whole ordeal, and I was curious about whether they had actually learned anything. "Who's running the HOA now?" I asked. There was a special election in January. Brenda was removed as president. I'm actually the president now, and we have a mostly new board. Travis is still here, and we brought in some other residents who were frustrated with how things were being run. And Brenda, still on the board technically, but she has no operational authority. I promise you, Patrick, we'll do this right. Written contract, deposit upfront, regular progress payments, the whole professional arrangement. Against my better judgment, I agreed to at least come look at the situation. When I arrived at Riverside Estates, the scene was chaos but different from last time. A large section of the north community was flooded, water pooling in yards and streets. The drainage system, which should have channeled monsoon runoff to retention basins, had apparently collapsed underground. George met me with a proper work order, a written scope of services, and a contract prepared by an attorney. "I want everything documented and legitimate," he said. We learned our lesson. The job would require excavating several sections to identify where the drainage pipes had failed, removing damaged pipes, installing new drainage infrastructure, and restoring the landscaping. It was a big job, probably $15,000 to $20,000 worth of work spread over a couple of weeks. I need a $5,000 deposit before I start, I said, and progress payments every 3 days. Absolutely. I'll write you a check right now for the deposit. He did, and I verified it cleared before I began work. The job went smoothly. George was communicative, professional, and appreciative. Other board members, including Travis, stopped by regularly to check on progress and thank me for the work. It felt good to be treated with respect. About a week into the project, while I was operating my excavator in one of the flooded sections, I noticed someone watching from across the street. It was Brenda, standing with her arms crossed, glaring at me with unconcealed hatred. I ignored her and continued working. Later that afternoon, George approached me looking worried. "I need to give you a heads up about something. Brenda has been making noise about you to anyone who will listen. She's claiming you're overcharging, that the work isn't necessary, and that the new board is corrupt for hiring you." "Is she gaining any traction?" "Not really. Most people remember what happened last time and they're happy with the work you're doing, but she's persistent. I just wanted you to be aware." I appreciated the warning but focused on completing the job professionally. By the end of the second week, I had identified and repaired 3 major breaks in the drainage system, installed new pipes with proper grading, and restored the affected areas. The community's drainage system was now better than it had been in years, possibly ever. The final invoice came to $18,300. George reviewed it carefully, compared it to the contract and work completed, and had the HOA cut a check for the full amount within 2 days. This was how business was supposed to work. "I can't thank you enough," George said when he handed me the check. "Not just for the work, but for giving us another chance. A lot of contractors would have told us to get lost after what Brenda pulled. You've been fair and professional. That's all I ask." I thought that was truly the end of my involvement with Riverside Estates. I had been paid fairly for 2 jobs, helped a community in need, and restored my faith that most people, when given the chance, would do the right thing. Then June arrived, and with it, another phone call that would drag me back into HOA drama. This time, it wasn't George calling. It was a detective from the Phoenix Police Department. "Mr. Yates, this is Detective Sarah Coleman. I'm investigating a case of embezzlement and fraud involving the Riverside Estates HOA. Your name has come up in our investigation, and I'd like to ask you some questions." My stomach dropped. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sir, not at all. We believe you may have been a victim of attempted fraud, and we need your testimony and documentation." I met Detective Coleman at a coffee shop in North Phoenix the next day. She was in her 40s, professional and thorough, with a thick file folder in front of her. "What can you tell me about your interactions with Brenda Patterson?" she asked after we exchanged pleasantries. I walked her through the entire saga, the initial emergency job, the refusal to pay, the small claims case, and everything that followed. She took notes and asked clarifying questions. "Here's what we've uncovered," Detective Coleman said. "The Arizona Corporation Commission flagged Riverside Estates HOA for financial irregularities about 3 months ago. When the new board, led by George Anderson, took over, they hired a forensic accountant to review the books. That accountant found over $200,000 in unexplained expenses and missing funds during Brenda Patterson's tenure as president." I let out a low whistle. 200,000, at least, possibly more. She created fake vendors, padded invoices, and in some cases, simply transferred HOA funds to her personal accounts. The retaining wall situation is particularly relevant to our case. "How so?" "We believe she hired you, knowing the work was legitimate, then refused payment so she could justify hiring a second contractor, one that we've traced back to a shell company she controlled. She paid that fake company $45,000 for the retaining wall replacement. But the work was actually done. I saw the new wall. Yes, but it didn't cost $45,000. We found the actual contractor she hired, a legitimate company that she paid $10,000 under the table. She pocketed the difference and used your unpaid invoice as justification for why she needed to hire someone else. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Brenda hadn't just stolen from me. She had stolen from the entire community, from her neighbors, from people who trusted her to manage their shared assets. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "All of your documentation, the recordings, invoices, emails, everything. You're going to be a witness in the case." I provided everything I had. Over the next few months, the case against Brenda grew stronger. The forensic accountant uncovered more fraud. Other contractors came forward with similar stories, and the paper trail became overwhelming. In September, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with 15 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The arraignment was scheduled for October, and I was asked to attend as a witness and provide a victim impact statement. The courtroom was packed with Riverside Estates residents, people whose HOA fees had been stolen, whose trust had been betrayed. Brenda showed up with a high-priced defense attorney, trying to look dignified and innocent. But the evidence was damning. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Amanda Torres, laid out the scheme in detail. Bank records, fake invoices, email communications, and testimony from multiple witnesses painted a picture of systematic theft over more than 3 years. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium and looked directly at Brenda. "What you did to me was wrong, but it was about more than money. You tried to destroy my reputation. You threatened me for asking for fair payment. You lied to your community and made me look like the bad guy when I was just trying to run an honest business. Small business owners work hard for every dollar, and you tried to take that from me because you thought you could get away with it." Other residents spoke, sharing their stories of how the theft had impacted the community. Higher HOA fees to cover budget shortfalls, deferred maintenance because funds weren't available, and the general erosion of trust that made neighborhood life difficult. The judge, a stern man named Judge Richardson, listened to everything carefully. When it was time for Brenda to speak, she offered a half-hearted apology that focused more on her own difficulties than the harm she had caused. "Miss Patterson, you held a position of trust," Judge Richardson said. "Homeowners associations are designed to serve communities, to pool resources for common benefit. You perverted that purpose for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, you attempted to defraud contractors, and when challenged, you used the legal system as a weapon to intimidate people seeking legitimate payment." He sentenced her to 6 years in state prison and ordered full restitution of $237,000, the total amount of funds the forensic accounting had traced to her theft. She would likely serve 4 years with good behavior, and the restitution would probably never be fully paid, but justice had been served. As we left the courtroom, George approached me. "I can't believe it was that much money. We all knew something was off, but none of us imagined the scale of it." "The scary part is how easily she got away with it for so long," I said. "If the new board hadn't done a thorough audit, she might still be doing it. We're implementing new controls, multiple signatures on checks, monthly financial reviews, and complete transparency with all residents. This will never happen again, not on our watch." Susan, the elderly woman with the cat, came up and hugged me. "Thank you for not giving up. If you had just walked away from that first invoice, we might never have questioned anything. Your fight exposed all of this." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. My refusal to accept being cheated had started a chain of events that ultimately protected an entire community from ongoing theft. Life returned to normal over the following months. My business continued to grow, my reputation enhanced rather than damaged by the whole ordeal. Word spread about the contractor who stood up to HOA corruption, and I found myself getting calls from other communities who wanted to work with someone they could trust. George and I became friends, occasionally meeting for coffee or lunch. Riverside Estates paid me a small consulting fee to review their contracting procedures and help them develop fair, transparent processes for hiring vendors. It felt good to turn a negative situation into something constructive. One afternoon in December, almost a year and a half after that initial emergency call, I was at my equipment yard doing maintenance on my excavator. The same CAT 320 that had started this whole journey sat gleaming in the Arizona sun, a testament to quality equipment and honest work. My phone rang. For a second, I felt a flutter of anxiety, wondering what new drama might be calling, but it was just a routine job inquiry. A property developer needed excavation work for a new residential project in Scottsdale. Good money, straightforward work, and a signed contract before I moved any equipment. As I hung up and looked around my yard, at the equipment I had worked so hard to acquire and maintain, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I had built this business on integrity, and when that integrity was challenged, I had stood my ground. The $1,275 Brenda Patterson tried to steal wasn't just money. It was a test of character, hers and mine. She had failed that test spectacularly, and in doing so, had destroyed her own life and hurt countless others. I had passed by refusing to be a victim, by standing up for what was right even when it would have been easier to walk away. The title of this story should really have been about repossessing equipment, but the actual situation had never quite gotten to that point. After winning the small claims judgment, I had filed the paperwork for asset seizure, fully prepared to show up with a constable and literally take back equipment or property to satisfy the debt. The threat alone had been enough to get payment, but I had been ready to follow through. In the end, the most valuable thing I repossessed wasn't equipment or money. It was my faith in the system, in the idea that persistence and truth could overcome corruption and fraud. It was the knowledge that standing up to bullies, even institutional ones like an HOA board run by a petty tyrant, was worth the effort. I started up the excavator, listening to the engine purr smoothly. Tomorrow, I would head to Scottsdale for that new job. Next week, I had 3 more projects lined up. My calendar was full, my reputation was solid, and my business was thriving. Brenda Patterson was in prison. The residents of Riverside Estates had reclaimed their community, and I had been paid fairly for honest work. In a world that often seems unfair and chaotic, sometimes the good guys actually win. As I shut down the excavator and locked up the yard for the evening, I thought about all the contractors out there who face similar situations. People who get stiffed on invoices, threatened by powerful entities, or made to feel like they're in the wrong for expecting fair payment. My advice to them would be simple. Document everything, know your rights, and never give up on what you're owed. The sun was setting over Phoenix, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I climbed into my truck and headed home, ready for whatever came next. The HOA wars were over, and I had emerged not just intact but stronger. That's all any small business owner can ask for: a fair shake, honest payment, and the opportunity to do good work without being taken advantage of. And if another HOA president ever called me with an emergency, demanding immediate service without proper paperwork, well, let's just say I would approach that situation very differently. Written contracts, deposits upfront, and clear terms agreed upon by all parties before a single piece of equipment moved. The lessons I learned from Riverside Estates were expensive in terms of time and stress, but they were worth it. As I drove through the Phoenix streets, I couldn't help but smile. Life had a funny way of working out. The job that had caused me so much frustration and anger had ultimately led to new opportunities, new friendships, and a deeper understanding of the importance of standing firm in your principles. Somewhere in a prison cell, Brenda Patterson was probably cursing my name, blaming me for her downfall. But she brought it all on herself through greed, arrogance, and the belief that she could mistreat people without consequences. I was just the catalyst that exposed what was already there. The truth was, I didn't hate Brenda. I actually felt sorry for her. She had destroyed her life, her reputation, and her freedom for money that she didn't even really need. The forensic audit showed she had a comfortable income and savings. The theft wasn't about survival. It was about greed and the thrill of getting away with something. When I got home that evening, I poured myself a beer and sat on my back patio, watching the last light fade from the sky. My wife, Jennifer, came out and sat beside me. "You're thinking about the HOA thing again," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know? You get this look like you're processing something heavy. What's on your mind?" I told her about running into George earlier that day, about how the community was thriving under new leadership, about how they had even increased property values by properly maintaining the common areas with the recovered funds. "It all worked out," Jennifer said, squeezing my hand. "You did the right thing, and good things came from it." She was right, of course. But more than that, the whole experience had taught me something valuable about business, about people, and about the importance of community accountability. HOAs serve an important function when run properly, maintaining shared spaces, preserving property values, and creating pleasant living environments. But they require oversight, transparency, and honest leadership. The residents of Riverside Estates had learned that lesson the hard way, but they had learned it. Other communities had reached out to me asking for advice on preventing similar situations. I had become an unlikely advocate for HOA reform, speaking at a few community meetings about the importance of financial controls and regular audits. It was strange how life worked out. One refused invoice had spiraled into a crusade against corruption, ultimately helping protect other communities from similar fraud. If Brenda had just paid my $1,275 bill, she would probably still be happily embezzling money, and dozens of families would continue losing their hard-earned HOA fees to her schemes. So, in a twisted way, her attempt to cheat me had actually saved the community far more money than she ever stole from me. The universe had a sense of justice after all, even if it took a while to manifest. As night fell completely and the stars came out, I finished my beer and stood up. Tomorrow was another workday, another opportunity to do quality work, serve clients honestly, and build something worthwhile. The drama was over, the checks had cleared, and justice had been served. Life was good. My excavator was ready for the next job, my reputation was intact, and I could sleep soundly knowing I had stood up for what was right. Sometimes that's all you can ask for in this world. A fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and the satisfaction of knowing you didn't back down when challenged. The HOA wars were over, and Patrick Yates had emerged victorious, not through aggression or revenge, but through persistence, documentation, and an unwillingness to accept being wronged. It was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my career, and one I hoped others might learn from as well. Stand up for yourself, trust the system even when it seems broken, and never, ever let someone steal from you without a fight. In the end, the truth will out and justice, however delayed, will find its way.